Let's listen to him.
A repetition of everything that we've seen over the last 11 months. But we are in a remarkable juncture for the U.S. House of Representatives because this is an impeachment inquiry where no one has been able to define what criminal or constitutional offense they're looking for. We don't know what the crime is. You know, the mysteries are called a whodunit, because it starts with a crime and then you try to determine who committed it. This is more like a what is it, not a whodunit. We don't know what the crime is, and there are thousands and thousands of pages of evidence, but all of the evidence demonstrates beyond any reasonable doubt that President Joe Biden is not guilty of any impeachable offense that we can determine. And with that, I'm going to call on my colleagues to come up, and we'll take turns between oversight and judiciary. But perhaps I can start with the vice-ranking member of the Oversight Committee, and then we'll go over to judiciary.
Thank you, Ranking Member Raskin. The ranking member laid out what's happening here quite clearly. Republicans do not have a case. And let's also remind everybody that this impeachment inquiry by the Republican Party has already begun in a public forum. They launched an impeachment inquiry without a House floor vote already. And their own witness, the own Republican witness, said that there are, from what he has seen, there are not grounds for an impeachment inquiry, or rather, frankly, impeachment in general of President Biden. But that has not deterred the Republican side from continuing to try to force through a completely groundless and unsubstantiated, I won't even call it an investigation, I'll just call it an exercise in futility. What we've seen from this deposition, Chairman Comer himself told Hunter Biden, you choose. Whichever you choose, come in public and come in private. Hunter Biden, in an attempt to clear his name from what has been happening publicly, has stated that he is willing to testify to the public. But because the Republican investigation has been debunked, exposed, and consistently covered and exposed as having falsehoods, they decided that they will take back and rescind their offer of a public investigation.
So this is going to go on now with a parade of Democrats at the microphone. Then we can anticipate Republicans at some point, too. What card James Comer plays next is really the next stage in the story here. Andy McCarthy joins our coverage. And, Andy, good morning to you. Top line thought at the moment is what for you? Hello.
Well, I think that, you know, this is all predictable, actually, and there seems to be some confusion. There's two different things going on. There is the subpoena, which is an enforceable order to show up. And then there is the Fifth Amendment privilege, which is a legal privilege not to answer questions. He has to show up. He doesn't have to answer questions. Now, I think Hunter thinks that perhaps they can push back on the obligation to show up by arguing, as you just heard from the Democrats who were speaking, that the impeachment inquiry is not authorized by the full House at this point. And I think what Abby Lowell would argue is the fact that they are in haste to try to have a vote, as Chad mentioned a few minutes ago, demonstrates that they should have had the vote and had the impeachment inquiry formally authorized before they issued a subpoena to Hunter. So that'll be his claim as to why he doesn't have to show up. But he never had to testify. We had if you remember, a couple of years ago, the Democrats, during one of the impeachment investigations of Trump, subpoenaed Don McGahn, the White House counsel, who had a privilege not to testify because of executive privilege. And then District Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson issued an opinion that said he has to show up because it's a subpoena, but whether he has to testify or not is going to depend on a question-by-question basis, whether he has a privilege or not to answer that particular question. So, you know, I think he thinks he's got a basis to push back against the claim that he should be held in contempt. He will argue that the impeachment inquiry wasn't legitimate because it hadn't been authorized by a vote of the full House. But in the meantime, he was never going to testify because anything he says can be used in the criminal cases against him, number one. And number two, blew up during the Trump years. So during the January 6th committee, what these guys did was they brought in a bunch of people who they knew had a Fifth Amendment privilege not to testify. They brought them into closed-door depositions, and they all took the Fifth. And what ended up happening was the committee took that testimony and sliced and diced it so that it could play it during the presentations that I won't call them hearings because they really weren't hearings in the traditional sense. But they would do these summary presentations of what they said their evidence was, and they kept showing on the screen people taking the Fifth. And then they argued from that taking the Fifth should be presumed to be an admission of guilt, and that anybody who was doing that was, number one, guilty, and number two, obstructing the investigation by not providing information. Hunter doesn't want to be in that position, but I think he's going to end up being in that position because ultimately he'll have to come, he'll have to show up, and they can make him, take the Fifth if they push him on questions. So
ultimately he'll be sitting at that table, and at that point he can say, I exercise my constitutional right and I plead the Fifth Amendment, Danny. Right. And then they'll put it out as an admission of guilt. It's good for the goose.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.